Hello, y'all. This is Prime Trans Hero Gaming, and today I'm going to be talking about the Transformers movies, especially the ones I love, and and some that wasn't too crazy about, but I'm going to be ranking them. Now I'm going to start with the first movie that came out 2007. I think it came out in June. I think it was June's. No, it wasn't June. It was July. It was sometime in July. 2007, and I remember going to the movies the day it came out. I seen it with my brother, and we had an absolute blast when we went to see it. Now, when we went to see it, we didn't go early. We went really late. We went like around the time it was dark. We went to the movies, and around this time it was really packed, and it was rush hour traffic. And we just had an absolute blast, and I remember I could not wait to see the movie. And I remember when I seen it, I was just so blown away by the special effects and just how amazed to see the robots come to life on a big screen. And it was really cool. It was just incredible. It was an amazing feeling of being a fan, and something just I just love. It was just incredible how they took something that was a cartoon, that was a toy, and they just brought it to life on a big screen. And it was just an incredible experience. Amazing experience, but also an incredible experience. And I just had an absolute blast. I enjoyed the movie. The movie had a great story, and it was about the Allspark. That was one of the main plots about the movie. We also got human characters like Sam Witwicky, Michaela Baines, Agent Simmons, Major Lennox, and Epps. And we got a lot of human characters in the movie too, but we also got a lot of fan favorites that they introduced in the very first Transformers movie. Characters like Blackout, Barricade, Megatron, Starscream, Bone Crusher, Brawl, and even Autobot fan favorite characters like Jazz, Optimus Prime, Bumblebee, Ironheart, Ratchet, and many more. It was just really cool, and it was just, I think they did an incredible job bringing the robots to life on a big screen. And this was the first Transformers movie that Michael Bay did and Steven Spielberg, and they just knocked it out of the park. They did an incredible job with this movie. Now, I give this movie a 9.6. It was definitely a great movie, and it's a classic. I love the first Transformers movie, and it was just an amazing job how they had the humans interact with the robots, and it just looked believable. The robots didn't look too animated. They didn't look too cartoonish. They looked like the robots that we know and love, but it was a good blend. They looked realistic. They looked believable. And they knocked it out of the park. They did an incredible job with the first Transformers movie. Now the next movie that I also want to talk about, it was the sequel, Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen. Now, this movie came out 2009, if I'm correct. It came out 2009, and I remember going to see it with my mom, going to the movies to see it with my mom, and I had an absolute blast, with the movie. I enjoyed it just as much as I enjoyed the first movie. Now, before I seen the movie, I was hearing mixed reviews about the movie. The movie got a lot of criticism and a lot of hate for being the sequel. But when I seen it, I was like, what are they talking about? Because I enjoyed it just as much as I enjoyed the first movie, And I just felt like they did some things better with Transformers 2. Like there was a whole entire part that was CGI where they had Megatron, the Fallen, and Starscream talking to each other. And this was the first time they did this in a Transformers live action movie. It was a complete scene that was CGI, that where the Decepticons were discussing their plans to attack Earth. And this movie was based off a comic book. It was based off The Fallen. It wasn't just based off of the cartoon. It was based off a comic book. It was about The Fallen. It was about the original Decepticon. And I just think they did an amazing job, with this movie. This movie, in my opinion, is definitely a great sequel. Transformers Revenge of the Fallen. And I'll give this movie a 9.7, which I gave the first movie a 9.6, but I'm going to give this a 9.7 because I did like it a little bit more than the first movie. I like it just as much as the first movie, but probably a slight bit more because I felt like they did some things better, Plus, this movie had more characters in it. In this movie, we got Soundwave, Ravage for the very first time. And we also got characters like Skits, Mudflap. We also had characters like Sideswipe, the RC triplets. We got we got the Constructicons. And this was the first Transformers movie that had the Matrix of Leadership. This was the first movie that they introduced the Matrix of Leadership. They brought it into the storyline. And they also explained the history of the Primes, So I really enjoyed this movie. I feel like this movie is very underrated. It was a very underrated sequel. But just like the first movie, it was a success. I think this movie made more than the first movie. It did. It made a lot more than the first movie, And it was a monster hit. And I enjoyed this movie. But I have to say this movie is definitely underrated, Got too much hate and criticism. And in my opinion, Transformers Revenge of the Fallen will always be a great sequel. But I also love the first movie just as much, Now, the next movie in the series that I enjoyed as well was Transformers Dark of the Moon. Now, this was the first Transformers movie that was featured in 3D. And I think it came out 2011, if I'm correct. It came out 2011. To me, this wasn't just a great Transformers movie. It was incredible. They just took something and they just took it to a whole nother level. We got more characters on screen talking, interacting with each other in this movie. This movie also had a lot of action like the first two movies, but the plot, they went more further with the plot in Transformers 3. And it was more of a darker story. It was more darker and more emotional. And in this movie, I have to say it wasn't just great, in my opinion. Transformers 3, it was definitely an incredible Transformers movie. And I have to say I give this movie pretty much a 10. It was definitely just phenomenal as a part 3. There's not many part 3s that I have to say this all that great. But this was definitely a great part 3. It wasn't just great, it was an incredible part 3, and it was just as good as the first two movies, but at the same time, it did some things better, it was definitely, in some ways, in my opinion, it was definitely better, and and in this movie, we got Shockwave for the very first time. We got Shockwave, we got the Wreckers, we got Mirage, / Mirage. Optimus Prime had his trailer in this movie, which was really cool. And this movie was more darker, It was more darker. And it was more Decepticons in this movie. Now, some Autobots, some characters died in this movie, which is a spoiler, which was Ironheart. Ironheart died in this movie. And which is something I did forget when I was talking about the second movie. Optimus Prime did die in the second movie, which was really, I felt like that was a dark part in Revenge of the Fallen. But he did come back. He got brought back to life in the second movie, Optimus Prime. But in this movie, Ironheart died, and that was the last of Ironheart. He died at the hands of Sentinel Prime. Now, Sentinel Prime is another Prime that they introduced in the Transformers live-action movies. He was a Prime, but he was also the commander of the Autobots. He was the original leader of the Autobots before Optimus Prime. And he was just as strong as Optimus Prime. But he was very intelligent. He created these pillars which form a space bridge. You know, he was a scientist. And I really enjoyed Transformers Dark of the Moon. It was definitely not just a great Transformers movie, it was an incredible movie, you know. And they did an amazing job closing the trilogy off with Dark of the Moon. It, you know, was like a good closure to the trilogy, to Transformers 1 and Transformers 2. It was like the final chapter of the first trilogy. Now, the next movies I'm going to talk about is Transformers Age of Extinction. And in this movie, they was designing the robots. What they did is they redesigned the robots from top to bottom. They gave Optimus Prime a new look. They gave Bumblebee a new look. But we also got new characters. Characters like Hound. Characters like Drift, Crosshairs. You know, we got some new characters in Transformers Age of Extinction. We also got Dinobot characters. This was the first live-action movie that they introduced the Dinobots, which was very awesome. And this was the first movie that Mark Wahlberg first, when he came in, you know, into a live-action franchise, he was sort of, he was the main human character. He was one of the main characters. He took Sam Witwicky's place, and his name was Kate Yeager, and he had a daughter. And I have to say, this was definitely a great movie. I can't say I liked it more than Transformers Dark of the Moon, but I like it. I felt like it was still a great movie, you know. I can't say I liked it more than Dark of the Moon, but it was still great, you know. We got they did some things different with this movie. What was cool about Age of Extinction, it was different, you know. They did some things different, you know. And what I think what they did with Age of Extinction is that they started off small a little bit, like kind of like in the first Transformers. Like we had like a slight handful of Autobot characters and a slight handful of Decepticon characters. Now in this movie, Megatron comes back to life, but he comes back as Galvatron, which is really cool, you know what I mean? Because at the end of Dark of the Moon, Megatron met his end at the hands of Optimus Prime. But he was still alive, you know. But what they did is the scientists found the remains of all the Decepticons from the Battle of Chicago. And, you know, they also found Megatron's remains. And what they did is they wanted to make their own Transformers. I think that's what was so unique about Age of Extinction, is that it was about humans making their own Transformers, which was pretty cool. And what they did is, what happened was they was thinking that they came up with their own ideas, but Megatron/Galvatron was feeding them specs on how to make Transformers, you know, which was really cool. It was a cool twist. And I really enjoyed Age of Extinction. It definitely was a great Transformers movie. And I have to say I give Age of Extinction probably like a 9.4. Like a 9.4, 9.5. Because I gave the first movie a 9.6. I gave the second movie a 9.7. And Dark of the Moon, I have to say I give that a 10. This, I have to say I give it a 9. Probably like a 9.4. Now, Transformers, the next film in the franchise that I want to talk about is Transformers The Last Night. Now, this was the sequel to Transformers Age of Extinction, and it was the 5th movie in the Transformers live-action franchise. And I have to say it was the next movie I seen in theaters, the next Transformers movie I seen in theaters that I seen in 3D. And I went to the movies and seen it with my nephew and my mom. And I had an absolute blast with this movie. This movie was definitely a great movie. It had a great story. I have to say it was definitely better than... I have to say I liked it better than Age of Extinction. It had more of a better plot. But it still was just as awesome as Age of Extinction. But it seemed like it was just a little more to it, you know. It was about King Arthur, Merlin, and it was about the Cybertronian Knights, and it was also about this ancient transformer named Quintessa, which she was very powerful, and she created these Cybertronian Knights. But what they did is they end up realizing she was abusing her power, and they became good, and they